anytime you hear new information, like it can be intimidating, but start small. Like you don't have to, start by being like, you said that I have a wing and you said that I have this number. Like start with
What is the
exploring.
triad?
Yeah, I know. What are the triads? How do I make decisions? But start small, and it's a process.
Welcome back to That Twin Mama podcast. Your girl Lauren here, and you're joining me today of part 2 of my conversation on the Enneagram with the wonderful Enneagram Ashton. So if you haven't heard part 1, last week we discussed all about the basics of each type of Enneagram. We get into what Enneagrams can look like in marriage and partnerships, and especially how important it is to understand your partner's Enneagram with trying to communicate and understand conflict resolution. If you have not heard that episode and you're just tuning in now, go back and listen. It is fundamental. Also, linked in the show notes is the Enneagram quiz. Again, the quiz is where you start, but I would encourage you to do more research after you find out what type you might be and follow along there. These episodes mean a lot more when you kind of understand which type you may or may not be. This week, we're going into another fundamental and equally important relationship and in our lives and all of our lives listening, and that's our kids. Parenthood. How does the Enneagram show up in motherhood? So we're looking at each type, some of the strengths they might have in parenting, some things they may struggle with, what it looks like when we can be stressed in parenting, and just understanding why we are motivated in motherhood and in parenthood to do the things that we do. I found this episode incredibly helpful. I've been using some of the lessons I've learned about my type this week with my kids, and I feel like such a better parent. I feel like a really good mom, which is not something I say lightly. And lastly, we talk about, should we type our kids? What age is good to type your kids? What does it look like in twins? So all in all, this episode is great. If you're coming in from last week, this episode, you're going to learn equally as much. And I hope you enjoy just as much as I do. Let's do it. This is That Twin Mama podcast. But hey, you don't have to be a twin mom to be here. I'm not like a regular mom. I'm a cool mom. So whether you are new, soon to be, or seasoned parent, or maybe you just hope to have kids someday, I promise you'll find something to love, learn from, or laugh at in each episode. I'm your host, Lauren Berty. Let's do it.
So that's why it's important to look at all of the numbers, right? So it's easy to, even like on Instagram, right? It's easy to just, look at the posts that relate to your type or whatever. But it's so helpful because we're actually, even though there are 9 types, we're connected to 5 of them. So we have our main type, we have our 2 wings, and then we have our stress line and our growth line. And so we need to learn about all of them.
Yeah. And all of them, I can see where they show up for me. Like I can distinctly see why people type me as that when I'm working, why my family sees this side. That's just a very helpful context. I didn't realize it first. Okay. So speaking of like reading all the different types, I think another huge thing that I've realized has been beneficial for understanding the Enneagram is like how we are in relationships. And like one of the big relationships that a lot of people having are both with our kids, obviously, but our partners that are helping to take care of the kids with us. So I want to talk about relationships and marriage. And I know you have a wonderful book on Enneagram for relationships and your 2 to 3 year journal, couples journal, that you also wrote regarding that. And I would love to like understand how knowing yourself is great, but if we don't live but we don't live in a bubble. So how relationships, especially marriage, like Enneagrams can really help with that, or help with communication or common struggles.
Well, if we start to be able to understand why we do things the way that we do in and outside of relationships, we can also start to understand why other people do things the way that they do, right? And so how often are we in any sort of relationship where what they're doing does not make sense to us?
Yeah, 110%. Why do you do the things that you do?
And I'm not saying that, it's like a Band-Aid, right, for everything, and that like, oh, you should just understand it and then you'll have a great relationship. Because it takes work on both parts, because just like your partner is likely doing things that don't make sense to you, you're probably doing things that don't make sense to them. And once we start, it's a simple concept, right? Like once we start understanding that people do things differently, and like you would think that everybody knows that, but once you start actually understanding the why behind
Yeah.
that. It can allow for more compassion, better understanding, better communication, because again, everybody's going to communicate differently based on their type as well, because it's always going to go back to those motivations.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so since I'm with a 7, I'm gonna make it a little personal, but like,
Yeah.
so my husband, I'm not a 7. My husband's a 7. I am a 2, and which surprised me. But like, are there things I specifically should know maybe about a 7 and relationships? That'd be helpful for like a marriage, romantic relationship, but about knowing a 7. I'm curious about a couple of signs, but let's start here.
Yeah. So, and I do want to preface this by saying that I get a lot of questions about compatibility.
Yeah, I feel like people
So,
are gonna ask like, are there signs that should types that
yeah,
should not be together?
yeah.
People do that. Yeah.
And that's not really what using the Enneagram in relationships is about.
Mm,
What it is about is knowing the motivations of each, right? So I
right.
could essentially say, let's use 2 and 7. I could
Yeah.
say, like, oh, 2 and 7 are like the best pairing on the Enneagram. But if you're an unhealthy 2,
Yeah.
then that kind of
Negative.
goes out the window.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's important to use the Enneagram for yourself, obviously, before you use it in relationships, because you have to understand and get yourself to a healthy version of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when it comes to the 2 and the 7, 2s and 7s are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways. They're in what we call like the optimism triad. So um, I'll use myself and my husband, for example. So
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
husband is a 6, and he's not quite as optimistic as I am. He will call
Sorry.
himself,
I'm a little
yeah.
worried. Yeah.
Sixes will call themselves realists. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So right, so that is something that is really important to understand, but in
Yeah.
in our relationship, right, is like sometimes I have to tone it down a little bit and
Yeah.
really understand like where that fear or that worry is coming from.
Yeah.
So with a 2 and a 7, like you're likely going to be more open to understanding and hearing other people's feelings,
Yeah.
exploring your own feelings and your own emotions. And whereas what we talked about with 7s,
Yeah.
they're going to want to like run away from their emotions or any sort
Yeah.
of negativity. And
Yes.
so difficult conversations are likely, or I should say, yeah, difficult conversations are going to be even more difficult for a 7 because they don't want to face the reality of what that negativity could bring.
Yeah, and I think that nails it on the head for my husband and I. And I think without getting too into the weeds of there's so much again, read her books, but I do remember reading somewhere, I don't want to get too much into it, but like just like there's certain body parts that certain signs like kind of I don't know what the word is, but react with, right? Like heart,
Yeah.
head, or gut,
Mhm.
right? And I know that the 6, 7, and 8s, right? They're head people. Like,
Five,
can you
six,
explain a
seven.
little bit more? 5, 6,
Yeah,
7, yeah.
this is like my
Yeah.
favorite thing to talk about, so I'll
Okay.
just talk
Yeah.
about
Okay.
it.
You talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Because I know that
So
one's
the
different.
the Enneagram is split up into 3 different triads, and
Okay.
each triad contains 3 types, and those types have shared characteristics. So
Got it.
let's start with you. Let's start with us. The
Okay.
2s are part of what we call the heart triad or the
Yeah.
feeling center. So this is 2s, 3s, and 4s, meaning they receive information through their heart and
Yeah.
then they feel about things before they move forward. So whether they're making
Oh,
decisions, taking action, it's going to be based on your feeling. 3s
100%.
will sometimes say like, oh, I don't have time for my feelings, or they act like
Yeah.
their feelings aren't there, but it kind of presents itself as passion
Yeah. Yeah.
or like feeling a certain way about what people think about them, like
Yeah.
it just presents itself differently.
Yeah.
And then they all want to create significance or meaning from experiences.
Okay. Okay.
The 5, 6, 7 are in what we call, oh, sorry, the 2, 3, and 4 also struggle with shame. So they all have a characteristic that they struggle with as well.
That makes
So
sense.
they
Wait, so
struggle
wait,
with
can you
shame.
say more than like so that's the characteristic, meaning like we share that feeling when we are not feeling great. It feels like we're ashamed of something. Or is that what you mean? Like or
Yeah, so 2s,
yeah,
shame for them looks like they feel like they aren't doing enough for other people.
I see. It looks different for each sign, but
Yeah.
it's a shame.
Threes,
Okay.
yeah, threes, it's I'm not achieving enough.
Yeah.
And then, or I'm not successful enough. And then for fours, because they struggle with like some identity pieces, sometimes it's typically like, am I enough as a whole?
I see. Oh, wow. Okay. That's helpful. Okay.
Yeah, the 5, 6, 7. So they're in what we call the head triad or the
Yeah.
thinking center. So they receive information through their head and then they think about things before moving forward. The thing
Yeah.
about the 7 is that they often are impulsive and then they like spiral and think about it afterwards. So like their head still plays a role,
Yeah.
but it's not so like upfront as the 5
I
and the 6
see.
who like overthink all the time.
I see. Okay.
Mhm.
That's helpful. That's helpful to know.
So they all have a shared characteristic of fear.
Huh.
So fives fear that their personal space will be depleted. Sixes have
Mm,
that main connection to fear. And
yeah.
then sevens have that fear that they'll be like trapped or
Oh my God.
held
That's
back.
so true. That
Yeah.
is like, even I'm probably sharing too much, but like, I was the one that didn't want to get married for a long time, not because I didn't want to be with my partner, but just because I like worked at a law firm, like that did divorces. My parents had an unhealthy one. I just didn't know if it was
Mhm.
for us. And I think that really attracted him to me. Like
I'm
he
sure.
wanted it, but he also liked the idea that I was like not trying to, you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
I've seen him do this with other things. He's gonna be, I might
Yeah.
kick him out. He's gonna be like, what are you doing? But anyways, but yeah,
Sevens do tend to have like commitment issues
yes.
and they're a little like flighty
Interesting.
sometimes.
Yeah. Ah, okay, okay, okay. What's the other ones? 1, 2, and 3?
Okay,
Say
so
that
then
again.
the 8, 9, and 1
Oh,
are
okay.
in the gut triad or like the body center. So they have the strongest like gut response than any of the other types. But
Huh.
nines are a little bit more reserved. And so like their gut response is typically to just like not do anything about it. Um,
Ah.
so they all have the shared characteristic of anger. So
Mm.
eight, anger is just like a natural emotional expression. They don't really think much about it or give it much thought. It's like happiness, sadness, anger. For for
Oh.
nines, it's like being passive aggressive. So they'll bury their anger and then
Oh.
it'll come out as being passive aggressive. And then for ones, they'll say, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated or I'm
Huh.
annoyed. And like to the rest of us, it looks like anger, but they don't feel like it's the right thing to do to be angry.
I see. That is fascinating. And then for anyone listening to this, like even like from a relationship lens, I'm glad we went into this because
Mhm.
that to me, even understanding that part would be
Totally.
huge for conflict, huge for communication. Like that in and of itself of just how they respond to things and what they a shared commonality that they like a whatever emotion that they all like have and where it comes from, huge. So I think
So
triads
let
is
me give
honestly,
you an
yeah.
example. Like let's think about like making decisions, for example.
Mhm.
So I'll give you a little story. So when we go on like a family vacation, all right, I'm one of four. It's absolute chaos when we have
Yeah.
all of our siblings and all of our kids, whatever.
Yeah.
But my sister's an 8, my husband's a 6, and I'm a 2. So we're in different triads, right?
Yeah.
When we're making
Okay.
a decision about like where do we want to get coffee in the morning, my sister, it's like an immediate decision,
Right.
right? And she
Right.
gets so pissed off at us when we're like, "Well, I don't know." Like, so,
Yep.
but the difference is that I'm trying to think about how these coffee shops will make me feel in that
Yep.
moment. Like, is it a good aesthetic? Is this what I want to be doing? Right. Whereas my husband, as the 6, is like overthinking, like, are there better options? Is this in a good part of town? Like
Yeah.
what could go wrong if we, go to this. So a similar, right? We're all making decisions in our
Yes.
lives, but we're all going to be doing it a different way.
That's so true. And my husband, which is the 7, still in the head triad, right? And you were saying that sometimes it's like they'll do impulse and then think about it later. I think he's thought
Mhm.
through that I'm going to have more of a reaction, whatever we choose. It's like, what do you want for you choose? Because I know you're going to either be disappointed. It's going to make you feel something. You're going to like
Yeah.
care more about whatever you choose. And I want to maintain this like happy, optimistic me. So you like it's interesting. Just I realize why he defaults to me because he doesn't want to go back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably it's just like your feelings are going to be off. Okay, this is
Mhm.
super helpful. Okay, I want to take us to um like kind of a next step about like if someone's listening and they're on their Enneagram journey, Next, let me take it to parenting. So we talked about relationships, and there was a post you did a few days ago about just how Enneagrams show up as parents. And I do want to make this
Mhm.
clear. A lot of our listeners have young kids because there are a lot of
Mhm.
they're the same ages of my kids. And I think you had made a point of like not typing your kids like too
Right.
young.
Yeah.
Like, and what can you say
Yep.
more there?
So the top question I get is probably about compatibility. The second question I get is when can my kids figure out their Enneagram type?
Yeah,
And so, like I said, it's just like it's important for us to not assume other people's types. It's
right.
important to not assume our kids' types because what we're
Yeah,
seeing are behaviors. And
right.
so, really, the best age for kids to figure out their type is when they're able to communicate why they're doing something a certain way. That
Yeah,
typically comes when they're like teenagers, right?
yeah, yeah.
So,
And when they don't,
but
when they have a teenager, they don't want to talk to you. So good luck with
right,
that.
right. So good luck. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
but what the Enneagram can do is show you how to be an effective, healthy parent, right? Because
Yeah,
you're able to not just step into some of the like natural tendencies that you have based on your Enneagram type, but then you're also able to understand, okay, when this happens, I move into my stress number, and how do I prevent
yeah,
this from happening, right?
yeah.
Or I feel this coming. I feel this like switch to this one of my arrows coming. Like, what do I need to do to make sure that everybody's okay?
That's so okay. That makes complete sense. And I was also, as I was taking the test, like I've not taken the test before being a mom and reading about it. I'm like wondering if environmental factors do change your type at all. Because as a mom, like as mothers, I feel like two-ness like comes out a lot more. Like
Yeah,
just
it's a
putting
really good
yourself,
point.
you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so I'm wondering, does that ever play a role? Do we become like different types or does it affect our type when we become parents and having that thing to take
So
care of?
your type is with you from birth. If
Really?
there's
Okay.
if there's an Enneagram educator or expert who's telling you that it isn't, then unfollow them. It is
Okay.
hit that unfollow
Yes,
button
got
and
it.
go follow Enneagram Ashton.
There we go. There we go. There we go. Good.
And this is just how it is, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like your Myers-Briggs should also be from birth. A lot of
Yeah.
people think that it changes, just like astrology.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. It's the
from
stars.
birth.
They tell you exactly
Mhm.
when.
So your type should not change. You should be able to look back on life experiences and see how your type showed up in
Yeah.
those experiences versus those experiences dictating what your type is. So for
Yeah.
example, like if you your parents got divorced,
Yeah.
right, when you
Yeah.
were younger. So you should be able to look back and see how your type showed up in that process
110%.
versus that process dictating what your type was.
Yes. Yes. And for twos, for any like down the line, but for kids that are twos or me being a two and a parent going through divorce, it was so hard because I'm all about relationships and love. And I was like, do they not love me? Is
Mhm.
that why they're getting it? So I'd be super mommy when I'm with mom and like dad. It just was, it affected me a
Yeah,
lot.
I
So
was the same way.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
talking about divorce, I was a
yeah.
2, my sister was an 8, whereas, like, she had an entirely different
Really,
experience,
yeah.
like, in our childhood because she was like, "Protect Ashton at all costs
Yes,
during this
yes,
process," and, like, "I'm
right.
just gonna, protect myself and set boundaries,"
Oh my
where I
gosh,
was like,
that's
"Just love me, just love me."
right. I'm like, I just see the love
Yeah,
that's happening. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, that's so
yeah.
powerful. Okay. So that makes sense about not typing your kids because it's like it's based on behaviors and that's would be hard to do. But I think like understanding being a parent is the most beautiful thing, but can be the most stressful thing that you ever go through. So maybe
Mhm.
understanding, is there a way we could like maybe quickly understand like how certain types might be really great at parenting? Like what
Yeah.
highlights what great at, and then maybe something to watch out for when they're like low or stressed, like something that might affect a specific particular type in parenting.
Yeah, so ones are gonna be like the parent that is on time.
Yep.
They're structured, right?
Yeah.
They're efficient. They tend to have an organized house.
Yeah.
Like they just are really good at following systems and sticking to it. But also they're great teachers. So they're going to
Yeah.
like teach their kids how to be responsible and honest and trustworthy. What
Yeah.
they might struggle with is like inflexibility. Like they might struggle
Mhm.
or they might struggle with when like things don't go as planned, you know, you lose
Mhm.
your childcare last minute, you know,
Right,
things like
right.
that could really stress
Yeah,
them out.
that makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
All right,
Twos are like great at providing the emotional support, right? Just like caring for their kids, loving their kids, showing up for them, letting them be who they need to be. But where they might struggle is if they aren't being showed like any sort of reciprocation or you know, like it sounds dumb, but like when your kids are like preferring the other parent
Oh my
over and
god.
over, you know?
That affected me so one of my twins did
Yeah.
that. She doesn't anymore, but it really affected me. And, like, other
Mhm.
people are like, "No, take it as a break. She wants daddy to do everything." And now it's switched. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that was a break." But I was deeply hurt by,
Yeah.
like, her being like, "You want daddy." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" Like, okay,
Yeah,
that makes
yesterday, my chaotic almost 2-year-old, like,
oh my gosh.
flung himself into the coffee table like they do,
Yep.
and, like, got a goose egg on his head, and I was just
Yep.
like I'm there immediately, right? Like,
Yeah.
holding him, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Daddy, daddy," and I'm like, "Are you
Bro,
kidding me right now?
like, what are
I
you
am
doing?
here. I am
I gave
here."
birth to you, okay?
Yeah. You were cut
I
out of
can't
my
be
body.
It's so true though. Okay. And then
So
so okay, 3, I think you were saying.
threes are like your Pinterest moms, okay? So,
Oh god, yeah, that's not
like,
me.
they can be a little bit competitive, right? They wanna
Oh,
be, like, the best mom that they can be. They
yeah,
are also going to be, like, really great at, you know, organizational activities, like
yeah,
signing them up
like
for
the
things like that.
yeah, the PTA president or like not saying PTA presidents are 3, there's nothing wrong with it. I strive to be a 3 mom, I think a lot
Yeah,
of
I
times
mean,
or
yeah.
compare myself, to
Mhm.
them, but that makes sense. I feel like I know a lot of 3 moms
Yeah.
and I sometimes like, "Dang it, I should have been doing more
I know.
when I, like, hang out
No,
with them."
you've done it.
Yeah,
There's that 2 shame coming in.
right, exactly. There you go, exactly.
Yeah. But they're also just like really great cheerleaders. Like threes are
Yeah,
really great cheerleaders, encouragers. They,
yeah,
you know, want their kids to be the best that they can be,
got it.
things like that.
What do they need to look out for? What can be, like, hard for them in parenting?
For fours. So for
For 3s.
fours,
For
oh, for
3s, 3s.
threes,
Yeah,
sorry.
write it down. Yeah.
Um, so what's hard is uh, specifically for parents who work, right?
Right.
Um, being able to like kind of have that work life balance can be
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah, that
But
makes
people
sense.
always say to me, like, "Can I be a 3 and a stay-at-home mom?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just doing like, you're competitive about that,
With
right?" And
kids,
so
yeah.
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 Mhm.
Best
So
school, best
just
tutors, like, helping them, like, if they
yeah.
need a tutor in something, they are that tu like, yeah, that makes complete
Mhm.
sense. The stay-at-home
Yeah.
mom low key is, like, the hardest I hate, like, when people say that's not a job or you just stay at home, like, it is I was on
I
mat
could
leave, and
never.
that would I could never. It was a
Mhm.
break to come back to work. When I
Yeah.
was on mat leave, it was actually a break to talk to adults, to have expectations of the day. Like, it was I'm just saying, like, people are changing that narrative, but don't think because just because 'cause you're a mom, you're not achieving things you're achieving, like, the hardest job that's not a job because there's no PTO, there's no sick leave, there's no days off that you've ever
Right.
can achieve. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, fours.
Fours, so they are going to be just really encouraging to their kids to be like whoever and whatever they want to be. Like they
Oh,
are
yeah.
going to encourage like the artistic side of them and the creative side of them and encouraging the emotional side and really sitting with their feelings. Sometimes fours might take things too personally. So that can be a struggle. Or if, you know, they have a child who doesn't like to tune in emotionally or doesn't like to have
Yeah,
that creative side, like that might be difficult for them to wrap their head around.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense, yep.
Mhm. Fives are going to really encourage learning and
Yeah,
understanding and going to just really, you know, want to teach their kids. But where they might struggle is with like the emotional connection. And it's not
mhm.
that fives aren't emotional. Like a lot of times people ask me that. It's just that they have a hard time connecting the head to the heart. Like the head is
Yeah,
there, the feelings are there. They have a hard time connecting them and verbalizing them. And so that
That
might be
makes sense.
difficult as kids grow and develop and stuff like that.
That makes sense. That makes
Mhm.
sense. Okay.
The
Six.
six is like just super compassionate, trustworthy, like always there. Like they're the loyalists, right? So they are
Yeah.
like super loyal to their family, to their kids. What do you think is what they struggle with the most?
I imagine they are thinking everything could go wrong at any second. Are
Yes.
they prepared for all the
Yeah.
things? Like, what if we let her go to this and she gets the
Mhm.
lightning strikes her? Yeah, I
Yeah.
imagine they get a little bit scared, especially with kids. I
Mhm.
feel like it's one thing to be a six when you're thinking about yourself. With kids, like it's like you're. It's I can't describe the people listening are parents, but
Yeah.
like it's a different type of protection that all parents have. So I can't
Mhm.
imagine the six how that feels for them if that's how they naturally are.
So,
Like,
like, yesterday with the goose egg, like, it was
yeah.
immediately a concussion. Like that, and I'm like, "He's okay." Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, "He does this, all the time."
That makes sense. Oh, I love my sixes.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes
yeah.
sense. All right, sevens.
But
That's next.
also, like, last minute plans, like, that's gonna be difficult because they didn't have time
Yeah.
to, like, plan and prepare, and I know this about my husband, like, this isn't a new thing, but yet I still am like, "Oh, let's go to the zoo tomorrow," and it's, like, not enough time.
Yeah. I am not like consume this information and process. No.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sevens are, like, super fun loving, spontaneous, you know, all of the dad jokes,
Yeah. To paint a picture,
just, like
they're the ones hyping up your kids before bedtime. I'm like, okay, they're time for bed. I'm
yes.
coming. Like they are tickling and they're chasing each other around the kitchen table. This literally happened. I'm like, Ryan, they're going to bed. He's like, yeah, we're just playing. I'm like, this is hyping them up. They need to rest. He's like, all right, just one
Yep.
more game. I'm like, bro, okay,
Yeah.
yes,
So just, like, energetic, life of the party.
yeah, especially
Um,
with kids.
Yeah, where they can struggle is again, if there's any sort of like negativity or hard
Yeah.
feelings, then,
Mm,
having those tough conversations with their kids. Sometimes discipline can be hard because it like
yeah.
looks like conflict or it looks like negativity.
That's true, and I think it's even like hard emotions or like
Yeah.
like we're going through it. Our toddlers are pretty toddlery, you know what I mean? But like as we
Mhm.
get to teenagers, it becomes like more heavier conversations, deeper emotions, and I think like they kind of project as adults a little bit. Like he's taller than both of us, so there's been hard conversations on hard emotions that Ryan's like, you handle that. I'm like, no, dude, you're a dude. Like
Yeah.
you should be a part of this. But it's like okay, that makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense. Okay,
Yeah.
helpful.
And then the eight, so eights are like your mama and papa bear, like fierce
Yeah,
protectors
yeah,
of their kids, right? Like they will march into the school and, you know, do what they need to do to get the job done.
makes sense.
They are, just willing to take charge, willing to, fight for their kids, etc.
Yeah.
Where so similar to the five, sometimes it's like the vulnerable side of parenting
Mhm.
that can be challenging for eights. Again, if they haven't done the work, like if they've done the work to
Yeah,
be aware, once we are aware of these tendencies, right, then
yeah.
we can fix them or change them, not fix them because we don't need to be fixed, but
Yeah,
we can be aware and do what we need to do.
that's okay, that makes complete sense.
Mhm. And then the nine, so nines are just they're going to be able to see like all sides of a
Mhm.
situation. They're really like seeking to understand their children. They are, willing to go with the flow and
Mhm.
just very passionate, compassionate towards them. But
Yeah,
they're also, because of that fear of conflict, going to struggle with disciplining, maybe struggle with making decisions. They can sometimes get stuck in like procrastination, so they might
right,
not be like turning in the field trip permission form on
right,
time, things
right,
like that.
right. That makes sense. And I wanted to preface this, like, I definitely see myself in parenting with a little bit of all of these. Like, they
Yeah,
show up differently, right? But like, I think what we're saying is that these, based on your type, it's just like I want to make that distinction. I think it's just more that you have. What would you say, Ashton? Like it's not that you wouldn't like because I'm a two doesn't mean I'm not like I'm not like the one tickling my kids or like being super fun
right.
sometimes or forgetting to turn in the permission slip or making sure that like as moms as parents we wear several different hats, but I
Yeah,
do think there is something to understand like what your natural born with tendencies might be around your type, because this might be a little bit more present for you at times,
Right.
or especially when dealing with conflict or communication, understanding your type can really help. I realize my Enneagram shows up when I like call on it, like, okay, what do I need to do? It's when I'm processing, either I need to communicate or I'm dealing with conflict, and then I remember, and it helps me get through it with ease. So I just want to preface that for people.
Yeah,
Was there
I
anything
agree.
you'd add to that? Like, does that make sense?
So just another example of like, it is always going to come back to the motivation, right? So like if you, let's say you struggle with discipline. Okay. So nines might struggle with disciplining their kids because it feels like conflict to them. Whereas twos might struggle disciplining their kids because they want to be loved by their kids. So again, it's going to come down to the motivations.
100%. That's it. And like, even, and go back into the twos, like if they are having a super like happy time with dad, I love that. But then I might, the next time they go to bed, try and do a fun game, because in my mind, I'm like, I want to still be the fun parent because I want them to love me just as much, right? Or with the parent that's like the overachiever and they put their kids in all these different things. I want like my kids to feel like they're has the same access. So I'm like, okay, I need to sign them up for things, but it's not because I feel like I have, that's not what I first think about doing at all.
Right.
I think about it after as like a feelings thing. So I just love that you're talking about the motivation of why, because that is what the Enneagram is. Okay. Final takeaways. This has been completely eye-opening for me. Like, it's, in a way, I feel like if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard my human design episodes, my astrology ones. I love how this is really about motivation, because astrology touches on all those things. Like, but you kind of can stereotype an astrological sign sometimes. I do a lot of videos on it because it's a lot of like behaviors that show up, where Enneagram, I feel like, kind of flip that on its head. Yes, there's shared behaviors that some types do, but it's really, you can't assume a type at all by behavior. It's having those deeper conversations. It's going deeper. So before like we wrap, I want to leave you or ask you if there's any advice or any final thoughts you want to make sure our listeners take away, or if someone's just starting their Enneagram journey, what would you say to them? I know we've kind of talked a lot about it, but what would be a final thought or takeaway you'd want our listeners to hear?
I think that sometimes, it's anytime you hear new information, like, it can be intimidating, right? But start small. Like, you don't have to, start by being like, you said that I have a wing and you said that I have this number. Like, start with exploring. I know. What are the triads? How do I make decisions? But start small, and it's a process. Like, it's not something that you just take the test, you get your result, and you move on. Like, the Enneagram is a complex system that you're going to continue. Like, I continue to learn things. You're going to continue to take in the information and learn, and give yourself like grace and time to be able to do that. Like, it's not something that I always say, like, it's also not comfy cozy. Like, it's going to give you that punch in the gut every now and then, and like, take that and use that to create change in your life.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we're in just like a society that we want like quick fixes. We want the answer now. We want to whatever. And this really does requiring slowing down. Like I told you all, I've been following her for years. I've taken several tests. And it wasn't until like even this conversation, I learned some more. And having these deeper conversations with my husband, it's really, you got to do the work. And I feel like that's where the good part is. It's not a quick fix, I know all, based on one test. And so definitely echo that. Okay, Ashton, you have been such a gem. This has been such an amazing conversation. Please let our listeners know where they can find you on Instagram. We're linking everything in all her books below you all, but let our listeners know where they can follow along or use your services.
Yeah, check out my website at enneagramashton.com. Also, make sure you follow along on Enneagram Ashton on Instagram, and you can get my books wherever books are sold.
And that's a wrap for this episode of That Twin Mama podcast. But before you go, let me tell you how you can keep this village growing. First things first, are you subscribed? If not, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening so you never miss a new episode. We're streaming on all major platforms, so let's make it official. Secondly, let's stay connected on socials. Follow us on That Twin Mama podcast on Instagram for short form relatable content, and follow us on YouTube at That Twin Mama podcast for entire episodes in all of their glory. And lastly, and this is a big one, if you liked what you heard today, please leave a review. Your 5-star love means so much to me and the team behind the scenes and helps us to keep going. It also helps us to find parents like you who need to listen to these episodes, which mean the world. So until next time, take care of you, take care of your crew, and remember, you're doing an amazing job. See you soon. Peace.